Title: The Story Within the Silence. In the quiet embrace of the world, where only whispers of the wind and the soft hum of life linger, lies a tale untold, yet profoundly alive. Close your eyes and let the silence guide you into its depths. A forest untouched by time stretches endlessly, its canopy casting soft shadows that dance with the filtered sunlight. In this sanctuary, silence is not the absence of sound, but a symphony of the subtle, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the faint trickle of a hidden stream. Here lives a wanderer named Ellen, who has spent her days listening to the stories etched in the bark of trees and the soft murmurs of the earth beneath her feet. One evening, as twilight bathed the forest in golden hues, she stumbled upon an ancient stone altar surrounded by wildflowers. Etched into the stone were words in an old, forgotten language. She traced the carvings with her fingers, feeling a warmth pulse through her. It was a callous story waiting to be uncovered. As Ellen sat by the altar, the silence grew deeper, wrapping her like a warm cloak. From within the stillness, memories began to surface of people who once lived in harmony with this forest, their voices carried in the wind. The silence seemed to speak, not in words but in emotions. It revealed a time when the forest and its keepers thrived together, sharing stories by moonlight. But one day, their voices fell silent, their songs replaced by the hush of sorrow. Ellen, driven by an unexplainable connection, vowed to discover why the voices were lost and how to bring their stories back to life. Guided by the whispers of the forest, Ellen ventured deeper than ever before. She found herself standing before an ancient tree, its roots entwined with the remnants of an old village. The air was heavy with a sense of longing, as though the silence itself yearned to speak. She closed her eyes, placing her palms against the tree's weathered bark. In that moment, the silence transformed. It became a melody soft and haunting, yet filled with hope. It told her of a pact between the villagers and the forest, a bond that was broken when the villagers abandoned their ways. But the forest had not given up. It had waited patiently, preserving its stories for someone like Ellen to find. Ellen gathered the remnants of the past, the carvings, the melodies, and the echoes of memories and wove them into a new story. Sitting at the ancient altar, she began to speak, her voice blending with the gentle hum of the forest. Her words carried the promise of renewal. Slowly, the forest seemed to awaken, the leaves rustled as though applauding, and the once forgotten melodies grew stronger. The silence had transformed, it was now a tapestry of sound and story, woven together in harmony. Ellen stayed in the forest, becoming its storyteller, ensuring that its silence would never again be mistaken for emptiness. Instead, it would forever hold the whispers of those who dared to listen. Years passed, and Ellen became a part of the forest, her presence blending seamlessly with its timeless essence. The villagers who once abandoned their bond with nature began to hear whispers of the storyteller in the woods, a voice that could mend broken spirits and awaken forgotten dreams. Curious and yearning for connection, the villagers ventured into the forest. They approached cautiously, hearts heavy with guilt for their ancestors' actions. Ellen greeted them not with reproach but with kindness, inviting them to sit by the ancient altar. She shared the forest's stories of the pact, the sorrow, and the healing that followed. Her voice, carried by the wind, intertwined with the melodies of the leaves and the murmur of the stream. The villagers listened, tears streaming down their faces as they felt the weight of their disconnection lift. With the villagers' return, the forest began to thrive in new ways. They worked alongside Ellen to rebuild what was lost, planting trees, tending to the land, and singing the old songs that had been preserved in the silence. Children played among the trees, their laughter filling the spaces once held by sorrow. Elders shared tales by the fire, blending ancient wisdom with newfound hope. The forest became a sanctuary once more, a place where stories were born, shared, and cherished. Ellen knew her role as the keeper of stories was nearing its end. The forest no longer needed her guidance, for the bond between the people and nature had been restored. But she also understood that her story was not meant to fade. On her final evening in the forest, Ellen stood beneath the ancient tree that had first called to her. She placed her hands on its bark, whispering a quiet farewell. The tree responded with a low hum, as if acknowledging her departure. Ellen left behind a book filled with the forest's stories, written in the forgotten language she had learned. She entrusted it to the villagers, urging them to continue the tradition of listening and storytelling. As she walked away, the silence of the forest enveloped her one last time. But now, it was a silence full of life, memories, and possibilities. The villagers honored Ellen's legacy, sharing her stories with each generation. Travelers passing through the forest often spoke of its magical tranquility, describing how the silence seemed to hold something extraordinary. And for those who dared to pause and truly listen, the silence would reveal its secrets, just as it had for Ellen. The story within the silence was eternal, waiting patiently for a new listener to uncover its depths. Years turned into decades, and the forest grew even more vibrant. The villagers upheld their bond with nature, their stories woven into the fabric of their daily lives. Yet, the forest's silence continued to call to wanderers, its timeless melody reaching beyond its borders. One such wanderer was a young woman named Lyra, a traveler seeking solace from the noise of the bustling cities. Guided by whispers of a mystical forest, she found herself standing at its edge. The moment she stepped into the woods, a profound stillness enveloped her. Lyra felt a pull toward the ancient altar where Ellen once stood. As she approached, she noticed a book resting upon the stone, a book inscribed with symbols she could not yet read but felt compelled to understand. Lyra spent days in the forest, immersed in its rhythms. The villagers welcomed her and shared fragments of the stories passed down from Ellen. They spoke of the pact, the melodies, and the keeper of stories who had given the forest a voice. The book she found became her guide. Slowly, she began to decipher the forgotten language, its symbols revealing truths about the interconnectedness of all life. Lyra realized that the silence of the forest was not a void but a gateway, a bridge between the seen and the unseen. One evening, as she sat under the ancient tree, Lyra heard a faint voice in the breeze. It wasn't a voice of words but one of emotions, inviting her to step deeper into the forest's heart. Following the call, Lyra ventured beyond the familiar paths into a part of the forest untouched by any other. There, she discovered a hidden chamber within the roots of an immense, ancient tree. The air was thick with the essence of stories untold, their presence palpable in the silence. Inside, she found carvings and artifacts, each resonating with energy. Lyra placed her hands on one of the carvings, and in an instant, her mind was flooded with vision scenes of the forest's earliest days, the birth of its pact, and the lives of those who once cared for it. Through these visions, Lyra understood her purpose. She was not just a wanderer, she was the next keeper of stories, chosen to carry on Ellen's legacy. Lyra embraced her role, dedicating herself to preserving the stories of the forest and sharing them with the world. She composed songs and tales that carried the essence of the silence, touching the hearts of those who listened. Her voice, like Ellen's, became part of the forest's melody, blending with the whispers of the wind and the rustling leaves. Travelers from far and wide were drawn to the forest, finding peace and inspiration within its depths. The cycle of silence and storytelling continued, each keeper leaving behind a piece of their soul for the next to discover. The forest thrived, its essence eternal, its silence forever alive. And so, the forest remained a sanctuary where silence spoke louder than words, where each leaf and stone held a story waiting to be heard. Those who entered its embrace found not just peace but a deeper connection to the world and to themselves. Close your eyes. Can you feel it? The silence calls once more, weaving a new story for those who are willing to listen. As Lyra's tales spread beyond the forest, they began to weave their way into distant lands. Her songs and stories carried whispers of the silence, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. Travelers who heard her tales were drawn to the forest, each bringing their own stories, fears, and hopes. Among them was a young boy named Erin, whose village had been silenced by a great loss. Erin had heard of the forest's magic and the keeper of stories who could help mend broken hearts. He carried with him a small, weathered flute that had once belonged to his mother, hoping it might find its voice again within the forest. When Erin arrived, the villagers welcomed him warmly, sensing the weight he carried. Lyra met him at the ancient altar, her presence radiating calm. She listened to his story, her heart aching for the pain he had endured. Taking his hand, Lyra led Erin to the heart of the forest, where the great tree stood. She placed the flute in his hands and encouraged him to play, no matter how broken the sound might be. Hesitant, Erin blew into the flute, and a single, trembling note emerged. The forest responded. The leaves shivered as though applauding his courage, and the stream nearby began to sing in harmony with the note. Slowly, Erin's melody grew stronger, blending with the forest's own symphony. The silence embraced him, transforming his sorrow into a song of healing. Erin's melody awakened something deep within the forest. Hidden voices, long dormant, began to stir. The villagers, hearing the music, gathered around the great tree. Each brought their own instruments or sang, their collective voices intertwining with the forest's song. For the first time in centuries, the silence gave way to a crescendo of sound, joyful, powerful, and filled with life. Lyra stood at the center, tears streaming down her face as she realized the forest had reached a new chapter. Erin's music had not only healed his heart but had also awakened a deeper connection between the people and the forest. The silence had transformed once more, now a vibrant harmony of nature and humanity. As time passed, Erin grew into a young man and became Lyra's apprentice, learning the ways of the keeper. Together, they chronicled the new stories being born in the forest, ensuring that its essence would never fade. Lyra, knowing her role was complete, prepared to leave the forest and explore the world beyond. She entrusted Erin with the ancient book, confident he would carry on the legacy with wisdom and heart. Before she departed, Lyra whispered a promise to the great tree. "I will return, for the silence will always be my home." The forest stood as it always had, a beacon for those seeking solace, its silence holding an infinite well of stories waiting to be uncovered. Years passed, and Erin tended to the forest as its new keeper of stories. Yet, despite his dedication, he began to notice something unusual. A faint energy pulsed from the edges of the forest, a part long forgotten, hidden behind dense thickets and ancient roots. Curious and guided by an unshakable instinct, Erin ventured toward the source of this energy. The journey took him to a place no one had ventured before, a narrow, overgrown path obscured by vines. As he pushed forward, the air grew colder, and the familiar harmony of the forest faded into a tense, echoing silence. At the end of the path, he found a crumbling stone archway, engraved with symbols he had never seen before. Beyond it lay a clearing shrouded in mist, at the center of which stood an immense, weathered obelisk. The air around the obelisk seemed alive, thrumming with ancient power. Erin approached cautiously, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on him. As he touched the surface of the obelisk, It came alive with a faint, golden glow. Symbols began to rearrange themselves, forming words he could finally understand. Here lies the voice of the forest, sealed by those who feared its power. Only the true keeper may awaken it. The forest had not told him of this secret, nor had Lyra mentioned it. Erin realized that this was a part of the forest's story even it had forgotten. He placed his hand on the obelisk and closed his eyes, letting the silence guide him. A deep, resonant hum filled the clearing. The mist began to swirl, revealing figures, shadows of the forest's first keepers. They spoke not with words but through feelings, impressions of joy, fear, and hope. They told Erin of the voice, a gift that allowed the forest to communicate with the world directly. It had been sealed away when people grew afraid of its overwhelming power. Erin knew the decision to awaken the voice was not one to take lightly. He spent days meditating by the obelisk, seeking clarity. The villagers, sensing something monumental was happening, gathered near the forgotten path, waiting in silent support. Finally, Erin stood before the obelisk, his resolve firm. He spoke softly, "Forest, I trust your wisdom. If this voice is meant to be heard again, let it awaken." The obelisk erupted in golden light, and a sound unlike any other filled the air, a resonant, harmonious tone that seemed to come from the earth, the trees, and the sky all at once. The voice was not a single sound but a symphony of all the forest's stories, emotions, and memories, woven into a single, powerful expression. The villagers fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the beauty and depth of the voice. Tears streamed down their faces as they felt the forest's gratitude, love, and forgiveness wash over them. With the voice awakened, the forest and its people entered a new era. The voice became a guide, helping the villagers live in harmony with nature. It taught them how to heal the land, nurture the animals, and preserve the balance between humanity and the natural world. Erin, now more connected to the forest than ever, found his role evolving. He was no longer just a keeper of stories but a bridge between the forest and its people. The voice spoke through him, its tones shaping his words into guidance and wisdom. The forest thrived like never before, its silence now interwoven with the symphony of life. Travelers from distant lands came to hear the voice, each leaving with a piece of its wisdom in their hearts. As the voice resonated throughout the land, bringing harmony and healing, its power attracted not only seekers of wisdom, but also those who sought to control it. Among them was a group of outsiders, driven by a desire to harness the voice's energy for their own purposes. These individuals, unfamiliar with the delicate balance of the forest, began to disrupt its harmony. They sought to replicate the voice's tones using artificial means, believing they could wield its power without understanding its connection to the natural world. Erin, sensing the disturbance, gathered the villagers. "The voice is not a tool to be controlled," he warned. "It is a gift to be honored and protected. If we allow greed to take root, we risk losing everything we have rebuilt." Determined to protect the forest, Erin ventured to meet the outsiders. He hoped to reason with them, to help them see the beauty of the voice as it was meant to be experienced. However, they dismissed his words, viewing him as an obstacle to their ambitions. One among them, a scholar named Kale, was particularly insistent. Why should this power remain hidden here when it could transform the world? He argued, "Think of the lives we could change, the progress we could achieve." Erin replied calmly, "The voice is not ours to command. It exists as part of the forest's soul. To take it from here would destroy its essence and ourselves in the process." But Kale was not convinced. Determined to prove his point, he activated a device designed to mimic the voice's resonance. The forest reacted immediately. The trees shuddered, the streams darkened, and the harmonious silence turned into an unsettling cacophony. The disturbance awakened a deep, ancient force within the forest. Shadows began to rise from the ground, taking the forms of the first keepers. These spectral figures, guardians of the voice, stood silently, their presence exuding both awe and fear. Kale and his group froze, realizing they had crossed a boundary they did not fully understand. The lead shadow approached Erin, its form flickering like a flame. Though it spoke no words, Erin understood its message. The forest was issuing a final warning. Erin turned to Kale. "This is your chance to make amends. Leave now, and let the forest heal. If you do not, its power will consume you." Humbled and terrified, Kale and his group dismantled their devices and retreated. The shadows faded back into the earth, leaving only a faint echo of their presence. With the outsiders gone, Erin and the villagers worked tirelessly to repair the damage. The voice, though weakened, began to heal through their collective efforts. Erin spent days meditating at the obelisk, channeling his energy to reconnect with the forest's essence. The villagers, too, offered their voices in song, creating a symphony of gratitude and renewal. Slowly, the harmony returned, and the forest's silence was restored not as emptiness, but as a sanctuary of balance and life. Kale, changed by his experience, returned weeks later, not as an intruder but as a student. He approached Erin with humility, seeking to understand the true nature of the voice. Erin, seeing his sincerity, welcomed him, teaching him the ways of the forest and the responsibility of preserving its harmony. Erin's time as keeper was coming to an end, but his heart was at peace. The forest had grown stronger, its story more resilient than ever. He entrusted Kale and the villagers with the knowledge they would need to guide the next generation of keepers. Before stepping away, Erin stood once more before the obelisk. He placed his hand on its surface and whispered, "May the voice continue to guide those who listen with open hearts." As he walked into the deeper woods, the voice sang softly a farewell and a blessing. As Erin stepped deeper into the forest, following paths that even he had never traveled, the forest seemed to shift around him. The trees grew taller, their roots forming bridges over streams of crystal-clear water. A faint, golden light shimmered in the distance, drawing him forward. Eventually, he arrived at a hidden grove, a place untouched by time. At its center stood a smaller obelisk, different from the one he had known. This obelisk radiated warmth and emitted a faint hum, as though it were alive. Erin felt a pull toward it, his heart filled with both curiosity and reverence. When he touched it, a vision unfolded before him, a vision of the first keeper of stories. The vision showed a figure clad in simple robes, their hands outstretched toward the forest. This keeper, whose name was lost to time, had forged the first bond between humanity and the forest. They had discovered the voice not as a power to control but as a reflection of their own soul. Through the vision, the first keeper spoke to Erin. "The voice is eternal, but it adapts with each generation. You have carried it well, but your journey is not over. Beyond this forest lies Anothera, a place where silence has been forgotten, where the land cries out for balance. Will you answer its call?" Erin understood. His role as a keeper was evolving once again. The forest, now thriving, no longer needed his constant care. But there were other places in the world that did. Before leaving, Erin returned to the villagers to prepare them for his departure. He gathered Kale and a young woman named Mira, who had shown a natural affinity for understanding the voice. Together, he taught them the sacred songs and the responsibilities of a keeper. On the night of the full moon, the villagers held a ceremony to honor Erin's service and to welcome Mira and Kale as the new keepers of stories. The voice sang louder than ever before, its tones mingling with the villagers' songs in a celebration of unity. As the ceremony ended, Orin stood at the forest's edge, the weight of his past balanced by the promise of his future. Aaron's journey took him to distant lands, where the forests were silent not with peace but with neglect. Here, the trees were withered, the streams polluted, and the animals frightened. Yet, even in this broken silence, Orin could sense a faint, hidden melody, a spark waiting to be reignited. He began to listen, just as he had in the forest of his youth. Slowly, he pieced together the stories of this land, learning of its people and their struggles. He shared the wisdom of the voice, teaching them to reconnect with the land and themselves. The work was slow, but over time, the silence began to transform. The streams cleared, the trees regained their vibrancy, and the people found hope. Orin became a wanderer, traveling from one forgotten forest to another. Each place held its own story, its own voice waiting to be heard. He planted seeds of renewal, both in the land and in the hearts of those he met. Though he missed the forest he once called home, he felt its presence with him always. The voice had become a part of him, guiding him like a quiet companion. In one distant land, Orin arrived at a city built by ancient hands. It stood at the edge of a vast desert, its walls crumbling but still standing tall. The people of this city had long abandoned their connection to nature, their lives consumed by ambition, industry, and progress. In their pursuit of dominance over the land, they had forgotten the teachings of the voice and the deep harmony it provided. The city was alive with the hum of machines, the clatter of busy hands, but it was devoid of the natural sounds of life. The people lived in a cacophony of their own creation, their lives filled with noise, yet they were unaware of the emptiness they carried within. Orin stood at the edge of the city, feeling the weight of its silence, not the peaceful kind, but a silence steeped in disconnection and neglect. He knew that this place, like so many others, needed the voice, but how could it be heard in a city so deafened by its own creations? Orin ventured into the heart of the city, where he met a young woman named Alira. She was a scholar, passionate about the sciences and the mechanics that powered her city, but she too felt the ache of something missing. She had often wondered why, despite all their achievements, the people of the city felt unfulfilled. The hum of the machines that powered their world brought no peace to their hearts. Orin saw something in Eleron's openness to the silence, an unspoken desire to reconnect with something greater than their inventions. He took her to the edge of the city and showed her the desert stretching beyond. "This is where the earth breathes," he said, "and in the silence of the desert, the world's stories are waiting to be heard." For days, Orin and Alira sat in the silence of the desert, listening to the wind, the occasional rustle of sand, and the distant calls of desert creatures. Slowly, Alira began to understand. The noise of the city had drowned out the deeper rhythms of the earth, but here, in the quiet, she could feel the pulse of life beneath the surface. She began to see how the city's disregard for balance had led to its spiritual decay. Alira returned to the city with Orin, determined to change the course of her people. She spoke to the leaders, but they were skeptical. They had long believed that progress and technology were the answers to all problems. But Alira, armed with the wisdom Orin had shared, began to challenge them. She introduced the idea of bringing harmony between their creations and the natural world, of listening to the voice and finding balance once more. At first, there was resistance. The people of the city were set in their ways. But Alira, with Aaron's guidance, began to gather those who were willing to listen. They started small, bringing nature into the heart of the city. They planted gardens on rooftops, restored rivers that had been diverted, and created spaces where people could reconnect with the earth. Over time, the hum of machines began to soften. People started to gather in the gardens, in the quiet corners of the city, and they began to listen. The voice, once drowned out by the noise of industry, began to seep through, gentle but insistent. The people of the city began to remember the stories of the land, of the earth's rhythms, and of the symphony that lay beneath the surface of their busy lives. Years passed, and the city transformed. The once bustling streets became lined with trees, flowers, and flowing water. The air was clearer, and the people, though still working in harmony with their machines, learned to listen to the pulse of the earth. They found that their machines could work alongside nature, that progress did not have to come at the expense of the environment. Erin, now older and wiser, watched from the edge of the city. Alira had become a leader in her own right, a new keeper of stories who understood the importance of balance between creation and destruction, between progress and preservation. As the city flourished, Erin realized that his journey was not just about bringing the voice to places of silence, but about teaching others how to listen not just to the voice of the forest or the earth, but to the voice within themselves. Erin's journey continued, but no longer with the same urgency. He had witnessed the transformation of so many lands, and each one had left its mark on him. He no longer felt the weight of responsibility, but a sense of peace, knowing that the voice was no longer confined to a single place. It echoed in the hearts of those who had learned to listen. In the quiet corners of the world, people began to gather, sharing stories. Listening to the wind, the water, the tree sand, learning to hear the voice that connected them all. The world was not perfect, but it was slowly healing, one story at a time. Erin's legacy lived on through every person who learned to hear the silence, to feel the pulse of life beneath the surface, and to carry the stories of the earth forward. And as the wind whispered through the trees, Erin knew that the story would continue forever, echoing in the hearts of those who truly listened. Though the city had flourished, Erin's travels were far from over. A new call had reached him, a distant whisper in the wind. There were still places in the world where the silence had not yet been healed. These lands, buried beneath the weight of loss and abandonment, had forgotten the rhythms of nature and the stories that once echoed through their trees and valleys. One such land lay far to the north, a region once home to vast forests, now reduced to barren fields and desolate ruins. The people there had lost touch with the earth, their minds consumed with the pursuit of wealth and expansion. The natural world had become an afterthought, something to be controlled and dominated. Erin felt the pull of this land, knowing that the voice must once again be heard. He gathered a small group of trusted travelers: Alira, now a seasoned leader, and Mira, who had grown wise in the ways of the forest, setting off on a journey to the Silent Lands, as they were now called. When they arrived, the land felt heavy with grief. The air was thick with the absence of life, and the ground seemed reluctant to give birth to anything new. Erin knew that the land, in its deepest soul, longed to heal. The silence here was not a peaceful one, but a stillness born from neglect and decay. The people of the Silent Lands lived in cities built from stone, their lives mechanized and regimented. They had long ago forgotten the beauty of the forests, the rivers, and the skies. Even their stories had been forgotten, reduced to mere histories taught in schools, disconnected from the lived experience of nature. Erin knew the task ahead would be monumental. To awaken the land, they would need to bring back the connection to nature, to stories, to the deep, ancient rhythms that pulsed beneath the surface of the earth. They would need to teach the people how to listen again. As they traveled deeper into the Silent Lands, Erin and his companions came upon the remnants of an ancient forest. Its trees stunted and withered, as if the life had been drained from them. They knelt before the twisted trunks, feeling the emptiness that hung in the air. Erin placed his hand on one of the trees, whispering a prayer to the forest. "We will not forget you," he murmured. He could feel the faint pulse of life beneath the bark, like the heartbeat of a long-forgotten memory. The tree, though worn and battered, responded to his touch, a small shimmer of life flowing through it. The group spent several days in the forest, caring for the land, planting seeds, and offering stories to the ancient trees. Each story they told was an offering, a gift to the land, a promise that the connection to the earth would be restored. In the evenings, Mira and Alira sang songs, their voices rising to the sky, and slowly, the trees seemed to stir. The winds began to shift, bringing with them the scent of rain. The first drops fell on the parched earth, and for the first time in years, the land felt alive again. Word of the awakening forest spread quickly throughout the silent lands. The people, curious at first, began to gather at the edges of the forest, drawn by the strange, unfamiliar sounds of life returning. Urin and his companions welcomed them, showing them how to listen to the whispers of the trees, the rhythm of the earth, and the stories in the wind. As the days passed, the people of the silent lands began to remember their own stories, their own connections to the land. The children, once disconnected from nature, ran through the forest, their laughter blending with the songs of birds and the rustle of leaves. The people built new homes near the forest, not with stone and machine, but with wood and earth, living in harmony with the land once more. They shared their stories with each other, and the land seemed to respond, flourishing once again. The rivers began to flow freely, the soil grew rich, and the skies cleared. The work was not easy, but over time, the silent lands transformed. Urin and his companions stayed, teaching the people how to live in balance with the world around them. How to listen to the stories of the land and share them with each other. The voice, once lost, was now a living, breathing presence that spoke through the trees, the rivers, and the hearts of the people. As Urin stood in the heart of the newly awakened forest, he felt a deep peace. His journey had taken him far, but it had led him to a place where the voice would never again be forgotten. The people had learned to listen, not just to the land, but to each other. With Mira and Alira now guiding the people of the silent lands, Urin knew his time in this place was drawing to a close. He had fulfilled his role as the keeper of stories, and now it was time for others to take up the mantle. Urin wandered on, his journey taking him through many lands, each with its own story to tell. He knew that his work was never truly finished, for the stories of the world were infinite. He would continue to listen, continue to share, and continue to guide those who sought the truth hidden in the silence. And so, the voice of the forest, the land, and the people lived on, a never-ending song that resonated through time. It echoed in the hearts of those who listened, calling them to reconnect, to remember, and to share their stories with the world. And as Urin walked into the distance, the wind carried his voice. A reminder to all who would listen: the story is never over, for it lives in the silence and in the stories we share. After many years of wandering, Urin found himself at the edge of the world, where the land kissed the sea. The shores of the Whispering Sea, as the locals called it, stretched endlessly, the sound of the waves whispering ancient secrets. The sea had always been silent to the people of the nearby villages, its vastness a mystery they had long ago stopped trying to understand. But to Urin, it felt like a new beginning. As he gazed out at the horizon, he sensed something within the water, a deep call that resonated with the same voice he had carried through the land. The sea, like the forests and the skies, had its own story to tell. He decided to follow the call. With a small boat and a heart filled with curiosity, Urin set out into the waters. The sea seemed calm, its surface glimmering under the moonlight, but beneath it lay a deep, quiet strength, as though the ocean itself was watching him. Days turned into weeks as Urin sailed across the sea, guided by the whispers of the water. The voice spoke to him through the currents, the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull, and the deep, rhythmic pulse beneath the surface. One evening, as the sun set in hues of gold and purple, Orin felt a sudden shift in the air. The water beneath him began to ripple, and the voice grew clearer, though still silent. His boat drifted toward an island that was not on any map. It was lush and green, surrounded by cliffs that seemed to rise from the depths of the sea itself. As Orin stepped onto the shore, he felt an overwhelming sense of familiarity. This was a place he had known in his dreams, a place where the stories of the sea and the land had merged long ago. The island was empty, save for the towering trees that stretched toward the sky. But as Orin walked deeper into the heart of the island, he saw something extraordinary. An ancient stone circle, worn by the passage of time but still standing tall. The stones were covered in moss, yet faint carvings could still be seen, each one different from the others, telling stories of old. Orin placed his hand on one of the stones and felt a surge of energy, an echo of ancient wisdom that pulsed through him like a wave. The voice, now stronger than ever, whispered to him, "This is the place where the stories of the earth and the sea converged long ago. Here, in the silence between worlds, the voices of the land and the ocean merged to form the heart of all things." The stones seemed to glow in response, and Orin understood. This was a place of balance, where the forces of nature, earth, water, and air had once harmonized in perfect unity. The sea had its own stories, and the island itself had been the keeper of those tales, much like the forests had kept their own. As Orin meditated by the stone circle, he felt the presence of something ancient, a guardian spirit of the sea. It was not a physical being, but rather a presence woven into the very fabric of the island, a spirit that had protected the waters and the land for millennia. The spirit spoke not in words, but through the wind and the waves, sharing its wisdom. It revealed that the sea had long been silent because it had been waiting for a keeper who would listen, not just to the land, but to the vast ocean as well. "The voice is not only within the trees and the earth," the spirit whispered. "It lies in the depths of the sea, the rhythm of the tides, the song of the whales, and the cry of the seagulls. You, who have listened to the stories of the land, must now listen to the stories of the sea. Bring them together, and the world will heal." Orin stayed on the island for many months, learning the language of the sea. He discovered how the tides carried stories from distant lands, how the winds whispered ancient songs, and how the waves held the memories of those who had passed. He felt the deep connection between the earth and the ocean, the flow of life that bound them together. One day, as he stood on the cliffs overlooking the sea, Orin understood his next mission. He had brought the voice of the forest to the land, and now, he would bring the voice of the sea to the world. The stories of the earth and the ocean needed to be shared, for they were the foundation of all life. The world needed to remember its true harmony, the balance between the land and the sea, the cycles of nature, and the endless stories that shaped everything. With a heart full of purpose, Orin set sail once more, carrying the stories of the island, the sea, and the earth, determined to weave them into the tapestry of the world. Orin's journey continued across oceans and continents, bringing the stories of the sea to every corner of the world. Wherever he went, the people listened, reconnecting with the earth, the waters, and the air. The voice of the land and the sea merged into a symphony that echoed through the ages, carrying the wisdom of nature and the voices of the forgotten. And as Orin grew older, he found solace in knowing that his journey was not one of endings, but of continuous beginnings. The stories would never cease, for they lived in the hearts of those who listened. The voice would continue to call, forever, across the land and the sea, and the world would never forget. Many years had passed since Orin set sail across the seas, sharing the voice of the land and the ocean with the world. The world was changing, slowly but surely. Yet, even as peace and balance seemed to settle over the lands, Erin could feel an unspoken tension brewing in the heart of the world. He knew that he had not yet fulfilled his full journey. There was still one place he had not returned to, the forest that had first called to him, the birthplace of the voice. He set sail once again, not to the distant shores or the forgotten islands, but back to the heart of the forest. As the boat approached the familiar shores, Erin felt a deep, almost nostalgic connection to the place. It had been years since he last stood at the foot of the ancient trees, but he knew that this was where the final piece of the puzzle lay. Erin walked deep into the forest, retracing the path he had first walked so long ago. The trees whispered softly to him, their voices full of familiarity. Yet, as he ventured deeper, he felt something different, a quiet tension in the air. The forest seemed to be holding its breath, as if waiting for him to uncover something that had long been hidden. Eventually, he reached the heart of the forest, the place where the first keeper had stood. The stone altar, where the ancient carvings had told their story, was now covered with vines and moss. But the carvings still glimmered faintly, calling to him once more. He reached out to touch them, and as his fingers brushed the surface, the ground trembled slightly, and a soft hum echoed through the trees. Erin knelt beside the altar, his heart pounding. The hum grew louder, and the carvings shifted, revealing a hidden message beneath the surface. The first keeper's voice, the one who had forged the original bond between the forest and the people, seemed to speak to him once more. It was not a warning, but a request, a plea. "The voice you carry is not complete," the message whispered. "It is missing the most important part, the story of the people, of those who have forgotten their connection to the earth. Only when this final chapter is written will the true harmony be restored." Erin understood then that the journey he had taken was not just about listening, but about weaving together the stories of the land, the sea, and the people. The stories of the land and the ocean had been shared, but the stories of the people, their struggles, their hopes, and their journey had not yet been fully told. Only when the people understood their own place in the story could true harmony be achieved. Erin gathered the people of the nearby village, calling them to the heart of the forest. It was time for them to remember the stories that had been lost over the centuries. He asked them to share their own tales, their joys, their struggles, their connection to the land, and the sea. At first, the villagers hesitated, unsure of what to say. Many had long forgotten the ancient ways, lost in the noise of their daily lives. But as Erin began to speak, telling his own story of how he had first heard the voice, how the forest and the sea had called to him, they began to open up. One by one, they shared their own experiences, and slowly, the forest began to come alive once more. The trees seemed to listen, the earth seemed to stir, and the air was thick with the stories that had been hidden for so long. As the villagers spoke, Erin stood in the center, watching as the energy of the stories wove together, forming a tapestry of voices. It was no longer just the voice of the forest, the sea, or the land, it was the voice of the people. A symphony that included their struggles, their triumphs, their connections to each other and to the earth. The hum that had started at the altar grew into a powerful, resonant song, echoing through the trees and across the land. The forest responded, the branches swaying in time with the rhythm of the people's stories. The rivers flowed faster, the leaves shimmered with a renewed vitality, and the air was filled with the scent of new growth. The land, once burdened by the weight of silence, was now alive with the energy of shared stories. The people had found their place in the greater narrative of the world, and with that understanding came healing. Erin, now feeling the full weight of his journey, knew that his time in the forest was coming to an end. The story of the land, the sea, and the people had been shared, and now the world was ready to continue its own journey of healing. The villagers, now keepers of their own stories, continued to tend to the land with respect and love. The forest, once silent, was now a living, breathing part of their lives. The balance had been restored, not through force, but through the understanding that every story was connected, and every voice mattered. Erin smiled, feeling at peace for the first time in years. His journey had brought him full circle, from the forests to the seas, from silence to voice, from separation to unity. Erin walked away from the forest, but he knew that his journey was not over. The stories of the world were infinite, and each new day brought with it a new chapter to be written. As he walked into the horizon, the wind carried his voice, a reminder to all who would listen. The voice is not a single story, but the sum of all stories. And as long as we listen, the world will continue to speak. And with that, Erin's journey continued, not as an end, but as a new beginning, forever intertwined with the stories of the land, the sea, and the people. As Erin continued his journey across the world, the stories of the land, the sea, and the people echoed within him, guiding his steps. He had helped to restore balance, but he knew the true task was not over. The world was vast, and there were still places where the voice was only a faint whisper. Where the ancient stories were buried beneath the noise of modern life. One such place called to him. In the mountains far to the east, there was a region where the wind carried the sound of forgotten songs. And the stones seemed to hum with the memory of something ancient. The people there lived in isolation, their ways unchanged by the world around them. They had long believed that the past was something to be revered but never touched. Yet Erin could feel the land yearning to tell its story, to reconnect with the voices of its ancestors. He set out toward the mountains, drawn by the call of the unknown. The journey to the mountains was treacherous. Erin crossed vast plains and dense forests, braving harsh winds and heavy storms. As he neared the foothills of the great mountain range, he felt a deep pull toward a particular peak. It was said to be the sacred place of the ancients, where the first voices of the world had been heard. When Erin reached the base of the mountain, he found a small village nestled in a valley, untouched by time. The villagers lived simply, relying on the land for sustenance and following traditions passed down through generations. They had heard of the ancient stories, but they believed the land had spoken its last words long ago. The villagers were curious but wary of outsiders. They had kept their traditions intact for so long that the idea of change felt like a distant, impossible thought. But Erin, with his deep understanding of the voice, could sense the latent power in the land. He knew that beneath the surface of their traditions, there was a deeper, untold story waiting to be uncovered. Erin ventured deeper into the village, meeting the elders who were the keepers of the old ways. They welcomed him with cautious curiosity, and as he shared his story of the forests, the seas, and the people, the elders listened intently. Yet, they were hesitant to embrace the unknown. "There is a place," one elder said, "where the stones speak. It is a place we have always visited for guidance, but we have not spoken of it for many years. It is said that the ancients once gathered there, but their voices were lost when the world changed." Erin followed the elders' instructions and journeyed to the sacred stone circle hidden deep within the mountain. When he arrived, he felt an overwhelming presence, as if the land itself had been waiting for him. The stones, ancient and weathered, were arranged in a perfect circle, each one carved with symbols Erin had never seen before. As he touched one of the stones, the earth beneath him trembled, and the wind began to howl. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, and the stones began to glow. The voice of the ancients stirred, and the stories of the land and its people flowed through Erin like a rushing river. The stones spoke in a language older than any Erin had encountered. The hum became a song of creation, of the world's first breaths, of the harmony between earth, wind, and sky. Through the voice, Urin learned of the ancient civilization that had once thrived in these mountains. A people who understood the balance of life and the importance of listening to the land. But the voice also revealed a tragedy. The people had grown too proud, too confident in their ability to control nature. They had silenced the voice in their pursuit of power, and as they did, the land grew silent. The mountains, once alive with song, fell still. The voices of the ancients were buried beneath the weight of their own hubris. Now, Urin understood the story of this place was not just one of loss but of redemption. The land and its people had been waiting for someone to listen, to hear their sorrow and their hope, to bring the voices of the past back into the world. Urin called upon the villagers, asking them to gather at the stone circle. Together, they stood in the presence of the ancient stones, listening to the hum that filled the air. Slowly, one by one, the villagers began to speak, sharing their own stories, their own struggles, and their hopes for the future. The stones responded. The hum became a melody, blending with the voices of the people. The land seemed to stir, the mountains themselves seeming to breathe once again. The river that ran through the valley flowed more freely, and the earth beneath their feet seemed to awaken. The villagers began to understand. The voice was not just a story of the past, it was a living, breathing force, one that connected them to each other, to the land, and to the world beyond. As the healing continued, Urin knew that his journey had come to a final turning point. The land had been restored, but it was no longer his burden to bear alone. The villagers, now fully awakened to the power of the voice, had become the new keepers. They would carry the stories of the ancients, of the land, and of the people, ensuring that the balance between nature and humanity was never again forgotten. Urin, content with the work he had done, knew it was time to move on. He had brought the voice to the land, to the sea, and to the people. He had helped the world heal, one story at a time. Aaron's journey continued, but now it was no longer one of seeking. The stories of the world had been shared, and the voice would live on, passed from generation to generation. Wherever Urin went, the wind would carry the echoes of those stories, and the earth would continue to hum with the rhythm of life. And as Urin walked into the horizon, he knew that his journey would never truly end. The stories of the land, the sea, and the people would continue to be told, forever intertwined in the eternal circle of life. Years passed, and the world Urin had helped heal continued to thrive. The voice of the land, the sea, and the people lived on, woven into the fabric of life. The people, now keepers of stories, nurtured the bond between nature and humanity, passing the wisdom of the ancients from one generation to the next. But even as peace settled over the world, Urin felt an unfamiliar stirring in his heart. He had brought balance to so many lands, awakened the forgotten voices, and helped the people remember their connection to the earth and the sea. Yet, deep within him, there was still an unanswered question, a mystery he had not yet solved. He had heard whispers of other lands where the voice had never been heard. Places where nature had been silenced for so long that the people no longer remembered the rhythms of the earth. These lands were far beyond the reaches of the forests, the seas, and the mountains he had known. And though he had completed so much, Urin knew that his journey was not truly finished. There were still places that needed to be healed. Urin gathered his belongings, the staff he had carried throughout his travels, and set off once more. His heart was drawn to the unknown, to lands where silence had been stretched too thin, and to people who still did not understand the true power of the voice. Aaron's travels led him to a vast desert, a land so dry and barren that it seemed to have been forgotten by time. The sun beat down relentlessly, and the air was heavy with the scent of dust and decay. The desert stretched on for miles, and Urin could feel its silence weighing on him, pressing down like an invisible burden. In the distance, he saw the outline of a city, its walls crumbling, as if abandoned for centuries. The people within were isolated from the world beyond, their lives governed by fear and survival. The desert had taken everything from them: food, water, and hope. The people of the desert had lost their stories long ago. In their struggle to survive, they had forgotten the earth beneath their feet, the wind above their heads, and the water that once flowed through their lands. They had been left in a perpetual state of darkness, cut off from the world and from each other. Erin knew this was a place where the voice was needed most. He walked toward the city, the sand shifting beneath his feet, and as he approached, he could hear faint whispers in the wind, voices of those long gone, waiting to be remembered. The city, though in ruin, was still home to a small community of people. They lived in constant fear of the desert, their only focus being survival. The people were distrustful of outsiders, wary of anyone who might bring change. Their hearts had become as dry as the land itself, hardened by the harshness of their world. Erin entered the city, carrying with him the knowledge of the voice, the stories he had gathered from the forests, the seas, and the mountains. But the people were not ready to listen. They had forgotten how to listen. They saw only the barren land before them, not the potential for renewal that lay in the stories of the earth and the wind. Erin knew that he could not simply tell them stories. They needed to feel them. He needed to show them that the desert, like all lands, held a voice, a rhythm, a song waiting to be heard. Erin spent weeks in the desert, meditating, listening to the whispers of the sand and the wind. Slowly, he began to understand the language of the desert. It was not a place of silence, but of quiet waiting. Beneath the surface, the desert held stories of resilience, of life that had once flourished, and of the cycles of the earth that had been disrupted but were not beyond repair. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Erin stood at the center of the desert. He closed his eyes and whispered to the wind, to the earth, and to the stars above. He felt the voice stir within him, and in that moment, the desert responded. The wind shifted, and the air grew cooler, as if the land itself was waking up. The first raindrops fell, slow at first, then faster, until the desert was bathed in a gentle downpour. The earth, thirsty for so long, drank deeply, and the sand seemed to come alive with the promise of life once again. The people of the city, who had watched from the distance, began to gather, feeling the shift in the air, sensing the change. As the rain continued to fall, the people of the desert began to understand. They came to Erin, their hearts filled with wonder and hope, and together they celebrated the return of the earth's voice. The desert, once silent and barren, was now alive with possibility. The sand began to bloom with wildflowers, and the rivers, once dried up, began to flow once more. Erin taught the people how to listen to the desert, to understand its rhythm, and to respect the delicate balance of life. He showed them how to reconnect with the earth, how to hear the stories that lay buried beneath the sand, and how to honor the land as a living being. The city, once a place of despair, became a thriving community once again. The people worked together to rebuild, not just their homes, but their connection to the land. The desert was no longer a place of death, it had become a place of rebirth. With the desert reborn, Erin continued his journey, knowing that his work was never truly done. The world was vast, and the stories were infinite. Wherever he went, he would listen, learn, and share. The voice, once carried by one, was now carried by many. The land, the sea, and the people all sang the same song, united in their understanding of the earth's deep, eternal rhythm. And as Erin walked into the distance, the wind carried his voice, no longer the voice of one, but the voice of all. The stories would continue, forever intertwined, forever alive. Today's story ends here. See you later.